This little mystery was cleared up that evening by Toroku, who had made them feel welcome and readily agreed to talk to the abbot about the memorial tablet. Toroku said that Toyotomi Hideyoshi had once tasted and expressed admiration for the sake made for use by the temple. The priest had then established the brewery to make sake for Hideyoshi and the other daimyo who contributed to the temple's support. Production had fallen off somewhat after Hideyoshi's death, but the temple still supplied a number of special patrons. When Konosuke and Iori awoke the next morning, Toroku was already gone. He returned a little past noon and said that arrangements had been made. The Kongoji was situated in the Amano River Valley, amid peaks the color of jade. Konosuke, Iori, and Toroku stopped for a minute on the bridge leading to the main gate. Cherry blossoms floated in the water beneath the bridge. Konosuke straightened his shoulders and an air of reverence seemed to settle over him. Iori rearranged his collar. Approaching the main hall, they were greeted by the abbot, a tall, rather stout man wearing an ordinary priest's robe. A torn basket hat and a long staff would not have seemed unnatural. "Is this the man who wants to have a service set for his mother?" he asked in a friendly voice. "Yes, sir," replied Toroku, prostrating himself on the ground. Having expected a stern-visaged cleric in gold brocade, Konosuke was somewhat confused in his greeting. He bowed and watched as the abbot came down from the porch, slipped his big feet into dirty straw sandals, and came to a halt in front of him. Prayer beads in hand, the abbot directed them to follow him, and a young priest fell in behind them. They passed the hall of Yakushi, the refectory, the one-story treasure pagoda, and the priest's living quarters. When they reached the hall of Dainichi, the young priest came forward and spoke to the abbot. The latter nodded, and the priest opened the door with an enormous key. Entering the large hall together, Konosuke and Iori knelt before the priest's dais. Fully 10 feet above this was a huge golden statue of Dainichi, the universal Buddha of the esoteric sects. After a few moments, the abbot appeared from behind the altar, attired in his cassock, and arranged himself on the dais. The chanting of the sutra began, and he seemed to be steadily transformed into a dignified high priest, his authority evident in the set of his shoulders. Konosuke clapped his hands in front of him. A small cloud seemed to pass before his eyes, and from it emerged an image of Shiojiri Pass, where he and Musashi had tested each other. His mother was sitting on to one side, straight as a board, looking worried, just as she had been when she called out the word that saved him in that fight. "Mother," he thought, "you don't have to worry about my future. Musashi has consented to be my teacher. The day is not far off when I'll be able to establish my own school. The world may be in turmoil, but I won't stray from the way, nor will I neglect my duties as a son." By the time Konosuke came out of his reverie, the chanting had stopped and the abbot was gone. Beside him, Iori sat transfixed, his eyes glued to the face of Dainichi, a miracle of sculptural sensitivity curved by the great Ange in the 13th century. "Why are you staring so, Iori?" Without moving his eyes, the boy said, "It's my sister. That Buddha looks like my sister." Konosuke burst out laughing. What are you talking about? You've never even seen her. Anyway, no human could ever have the compassion and serenity of Dainichi. Iori shook his head vigorously. I have seen her near Lord Yagyu's residence in Edo and talked to her. I didn't know she was my sister then, but just now, while the abbot was chanting, the Buddha's face turned into hers. She seemed to be saying something to me. They went out and sat down on the porch, reluctant to break the spell of the visions they had experienced. The memorial service was for my mother, said Konosuke pensively, but it's been a good day for the living too. Sitting here like this, it's hard to believe fighting and bloodshed exist. The metal spire of the treasure pagoda glistened like a jeweled sword in the rays of the setting sun. All the other buildings stood in deep shadow. Stone lanterns lined the darkened path leading up the steep hill to a Muromachi-style tea house and a small mausoleum. Near the tea house, an old nun, her head covered with a white silk bandana, and a plump man of about 50 were sweeping leaves with straw bamboos. The nun sighed and said, I guess it's better than it was. Few people came to this part of the temple, even to clear away the winter's accumulation of leaves and bird skeletons. You must be tired, mother, said the man. Why don't you sit down and rest? I will finish up. He was dressed in a simple cotton kimono, sleeveless cloak, straw sandals, and leather socks with a cherry blossom design, and carried a short sword with an unadorned hilt made of shark skin. I'm not tired, she replied with a little laugh. But what about you? You are not used to this. Aren't your hands chapped? No, not chapped, but they are covered with blisters. The woman laughed again, saying, Now, isn't that a nice reminder to take home with you? I don't mind. I feel my heart's been purified. I hope that means our little offering of labor has pleased the gods. Oh, it's getting so dark. Let's leave the rest for tomorrow morning. Konosuke and Iori were standing by the porch now. Koatsu and Myoshu came down the path slowly, hand in hand. When they got near the Dainichi hall, both started and cried, Who's there? Then Myoshu said, It's been a lovely day, hasn't it? Have you come for sightseeing? Konosuke bowed and said, No, I have had a sutra read for my mother. It's nice to meet young people who are grateful to their parents. She gave Iori a maternal pat on the head. Koatsu, do you have any of those wheat cakes left? Taking a small package from his sleeve, Koatsu offered it to Iori, saying, Forgive me for offering you leftovers. Konosuke, may I accept it? Asked Iori. Yes, said Konosuke, thanking Koatsu on Iori's behalf. From the way you talk, you seem to be from the east, said Myoshu. May I ask where you are going? It seems to be on an endless journey, on a never-ending road. This boy and I are fellow disciples in the way of the sword. It's an arduous path you have chosen. Who is your teacher? His name is Miyamoto Musashi. Musashi, you don't say? Myoshu gazed into space as though conjuring up a pleasant memory. Where is Musashi now? Asked Koatsu. It has been a long time since last we saw him. Konosuke told them of Musashi's fortunes during the past couple of years. As he listened, Koatsu nodded and smiled as if to say, That's what I would expect of him. When he finished, Konosuke asked, May I inquire who you are? Oh, forgive me for not telling you before. Koatsu introduced himself and his mother. Musashi stayed with us for a while several years ago. We are very fond of him and often talk about him even now. He then told Konosuke about 2 or 3 incidents that had occurred when Musashi was in Kyoto. Konosuke had long known of Koetsu's reputation as a sword polisher, and more recently he had heard of Musashi's relationship with the man, but he had never expected to run into this wealthy townsman tidying up neglected temple grounds. "Is there a grave or someone close to you here?" he asked. "Or perhaps you have come for an outing?" "No, nothing so frivolous as an outing," exclaimed Koatsu. "Not in a holy place like this. Have you heard from the priest something of the history of the Kongoji?" "No." "In that case, allow me, in the priest's stead, to tell you a little about it. Please understand, however, that I'm merely repeating what I've heard." Koatsu paused and looked around slowly, then said, "We have just the right moon tonight," and pointed out the landmarks. Above them, the mausoleum, Miido, and Kangetsute. Below, the Taishido, Shinto shrine, treasure pagoda, refectory, and 2-story gate. "Look carefully," he said, seemingly under the spell of the lonely setting. "That pine tree, those rocks, every tree, every blade of grass here, partake of the invisible constancy, the elegant tradition of our country." He went on in this vein, solemnly telling how in the 14th century, during a conflict between southern and northern courts, the mountain had been a stronghold of the southern court, how Prince Morinaga, known also as Daito no Miya, had held secret conferences to plan the overthrow of the Hojo regions. Han Kusunoki, Masashige, and other loyalists had fought the armies of the northern court. Later, the Ashikagas had come to power, and Emperor Go-Murakami, driven from Mount Otogo, had been forced to flee from place to place. Finally, he took refuge at the temple, and for many years lived the same sort of life as the mountain priest, suffering the same deprivations, using the refectory as his seat of government. He had worked tirelessly to recover the imperial prerogatives seized by the military. At an earlier time, when samurai and courtiers had gathered around the ex-emperors Kogon, Komyo, and Sugo, the monk Zen-ei had written poignantly, "The priest quarters and mountain temples were all swept away. The loss is indescribable." Konosuke listened humbly, respectfully. Iori, awed by the gravity of Koetsu's voice, could not take his eyes from the man's face. Koetsu took a deep breath and went on. "Everything here is a relic of that age. The mausoleum is the last resting place of the Emperor Kogon. Since the decline of the Ashikagas, nothing has been properly taken care of. That's why my mother and I decided to do a little cleaning up as a gesture of reverence." Pleased by the attentiveness of his audience, Koetsu searched diligently for words to express his heartfelt emotions. "While we were sweeping, we found a stone with a poem carved on it, perhaps by a soldier priest of that age. It said, 'Though the war goes on, even for 100 years, spring will return. Live with a song in your hearts, you the emperor's people.' Think of the bravery, the largeness of spirit it took for a simple soldier, after fighting for years, perhaps decades, to protect the emperor, to be able to rejoice and sing. I'm sure it's because the spirit of Masashige communicated itself to him. Though 100 years of fighting have passed, this place remains a monument to the imperial dignity. This isn't something for which we should be very great. Isn't it something for which we should be very grateful? I didn't know this was the site of a sacred battle, said Konosuke. I hope you will forgive my ignorance. I'm glad I had a chance to share with you some of my thoughts on the history of our country. The four of them strolled down the hill together. In the moonlight, their shadows seemed thin and unsubstantial. As they passed the refectory, Koatsu said, "We have been here 7 days. We will be leaving tomorrow. If you see Musashi, please tell him to come see us again." Konosuke assured him that he would. The shallow, swift-flowing stream along the outer temple wall was like a natural moat and was crossed by a dirt floor bridge. Konosuke and Iori had hardly set foot on the bridge when a large white figure armed with a staff emerged from the shadows and flew at Konosuke's back. Konosuke evaded the attack by sliding to one side, but Iori was knocked off the bridge. The man plunged on past Konosuke to the road on the other side of the bridge. Turning around, he took a solid stance, his legs resembling small tree trunks. Konosuke saw it was the priest who had been following him the previous day. "Who are you?" shouted Konosuke. The priest said nothing. Konosuke moved his staff into striking position and shouted, "Who are you? What reason do you have for attacking Muso Konosuke?" The priest acted as if he hadn't heard. His eyes spat fire as his toes, protruding from heavy straw sandals, inched forward like a centipede in motion. Konosuke growled and cursed under his breath, his short, heavy limbs bursting with the will to fight. He too inched forward. The priest's staff broke in two with a resounding crack. One part flew through the air, the other the priest hurled with all his might at Konosuke's face. It missed, but while Konosuke was recovering his balance, his opponent drew his sword and stomped out onto the bridge. "You bastard!" shouted Iori. The priest gasped and put his hand to his face. The small stones Iori had thrown had found their mark, one hidden squarely in the eye. He spun around and ran down the road. "Stop!" shouted Iori, scrambling up the bank with a handful of stones. "Never mind," said Konosuke, putting his hand on Iori's arm. "I guess that will show him," gloated Iori, casting the stones toward the moon. Soon after they returned to Toroku's house and went to bed, a squall came up. The wind roared through the trees, threatening to tear the roof off the house. But this was not the only thing that kept them from falling asleep right away. Konosuke lay awake thinking about past and present, wondering if the world was really better off now than it had been in bygone ages. Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, and Ieyasu had won the hearts of the people, as well as the authority to govern. But he wondered, hadn't the true sovereign been virtually forgotten? The people left to worship false gods. The age of the Hojos and Ashikagas had been a hateful one, blatantly contradicting the very principle on which the country was founded. Still, even then, great warriors like Musashi and his son and loyalists from many provinces had followed the true warrior's code. What had become of the way of the samurai? Konosuke asked himself. Like the way of the townsman and the way of the farmer, it seemed to exist now only for the sake of the military ruler. Konosuke's thoughts made his body feel warm all over. The peaks of Kawachi, the woods around the Konkoji, the howling storm seemed to become living beings, calling to him in a dream. Iori could not get the unknown priest out of his mind. He was still thinking of the ghostly white figure. Much later, when the storm intensified, he pulled the covers over his eyes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When they set out the next day, the clouds above the mountains were rainbow colored. Just outside the village, a traveling merchant materialized from the morning mist and wished them a jovial good morning. Konosuke replied perfunctorily. Iori, absorbed in the thoughts that had kept him awake the night before, was no more talkative. The man trying to strike up a conversation. You stayed at Toroku's house last night, didn't you? I have known him for years. Fine people, him and his wife. This elicited only a mild grunt from Konosuke. I also call at Koyaku Castle from time to time, said the merchant. Kimura Sugekuro had done me a lot of favors. This met with another grunt. I see you have been to the women's Mount Collier. I suppose now you will be going to Mount Collier itself. It's just the right time of the year. The snow's gone and all the roads have been repaired. You can take your time crossing Amami and Kiimi passes, spend the night at Hashimoto or Kamuro. The man's probing about their itinerary made Konosuke suspicious. What business are you in? He asked. I sell braided cord, said the man, pointing to the small bundle on his back. The cord's made of flat braided cotton. It was only invented recently, but it's getting popular fast. I see, said Konosuke. Toroku's helped me a lot, telling worshippers at the Kongoji about my court. As a matter of fact, I was planning to stay at his house last night, but he said he already had two guests. That was sort of a disappointment. When I stay with him, he always fills me up with good sake. He laughed. Relaxing a bit, Konosuke began asking questions about places along the way, for the merchant was quite familiar with the local countryside. By the time they reached Amami Plateau, the conversation had grown fairly friendly. Hey, Sugizo, a man came trotting along the road to catch up with them. Why did you go off and leave me? I was waiting at Amano village. You said you would stop by for me. Sorry, Gensuke, said Sugizo. I fell in with these two and we got to talking. I forgot all about you. He laughed and scratched his head. Kansuki, who was dressed like Sugizo, turned out to be a court salesman too. As they walked, the two merchants fell to discussing business. Coming to a gully about 20 feet deep, Sugizo suddenly stopped talking and pointed. Oh, that's dangerous, he said. Konosuke stopped and looked at the gully, which might have been a gap left by an earthquake, perhaps one that happened a very long time ago. What seems to be the trouble? He asked. Those logs, they are not safe to cross. See there, some of the rocks supporting them have been washed away. We will fix it so the logs are steady, then he added. We should do that for the sake of other travelers. Konosuke watched as they squatted at the edge of the cliff and began packing rocks and dirt under the logs. While thinking that these two merchants traveled a great deal and thus knew the difficulties of travel as well as anybody, he was a little surprised. It was unusual for men like them to care enough about others to go to the trouble of repairing a bridge. Iori didn't give the matter any thought. Impressed by their show of concern, he contributed by gathering rocks for them. That should do it, said Kensuke. He took a step on the bridge, decided it was safe, and said to Konosuke, I'll go first. Holding his arms out for balance, he crossed quickly to the other side, then beckoned for the others to follow. At Sugizo's urging, Konosuke went next, Iori just behind him. They were not quite to the middle when they let out a shout of surprise. Ahead of them, Kensuke had a lens pointed at them. Konosuke looked back and saw Sugizo had also acquired a lens. Where did the lenses come from? Thought Konosuke. He swore, bit his lip angrily, and considered the awkwardness of his position. Konosuke, taken off guard, Iori clung to Konosuke's waist, while Konosuke, holding his arm around the boy, shut his eyes for an instant, entrusting his life to the will of heaven. You bastards! Shut up! Shouted the priest, who stood higher up on the road behind Kensuke, his left eye swollen and black. Keep calm, Konosuke told Iori in a soothing voice. Then he shouted, So you are behind this? Well, watch out, you thieving bastards. You have tangled with the wrong man this time. The priest stared coldly at Konosuke. You are not worth robbing. We know that. If you are no smarter than that, what are you trying? What are you doing trying to be a spy? You calling me a spy? Tokugawa dog, throw that stuff away, put your hands behind your back, and don't try anything funny. Ah, sighed Konosuke, as though the will to fight was deserting him. Look, you are making a mistake. I did come from Edo, but I'm not a spy. My name is Muso Konosuke. I'm a Shugyosha. Never mind the lies. What makes you think I'm a spy? Our friends in the East told us some time ago to be on the lookout for a man traveling with a young boy. You were sat down here by Lord Hojo of Awa, weren't you? No. Drop the stuff and come along peacefully. I'm not going anywhere with you. Then you will die right here. Kensuke and Sugizo began to close in from front and back, lances ready for action. To keep Iori out of harm's way, Konosuke slapped him on the back. With a loud shriek, Iori dived into the bushes covering the bottom of the gully. Thundering "Ya!" Konosuke rushed Sugizo. The lens requires some space and good timing to be effective. Sugizo extended his arm to thrust his weapon forward, but missed the exact moment. A loud croak came from his throat as the blade cut through thin air. Konosuke slammed into him and he fell backward, with Konosuke on top of him. When Sugizo attempted to rise, Konosuke rammed his right fist into his face. Sugizo bared his teeth, but the effect was ludicrous, for his face was already a bloody mess. Konosuke stood up, used Sugizo's head for a springboard, and cleared the distance to the end of the bridge. Stuff poised, he shouted, I'm here waiting, you cowards. Even as he shouted, 3 ropes came slithering across the top of the grass. One waited with a sword guard, another with a short sword in its scabbard. One rope looped around Konosuke's arm, another around his legs, and the third around his neck. In a moment, still another rope wound around his staff. Konosuke wriggled like an insect caught in a spider web, but not for long. Half a dozen men ran out of the woods behind him. By the time they were finished, he lay helpless on the ground, trussed up tighter than a bundle of straw. With the exception of the surly priest, all his captors were dressed as court salesmen. No horses, asked the priest. I don't want to walk him all the way to Mount Kudo. We can probably hire a horse in Amami village. A Pear Blossom. In the dark, solemn forest of cryptomerias, the voices of the lowly shrike, mingling with those of the celestial bauble, sounded like the jeweled tones of the mythical Kalavingar bird. Two men coming down from the top of Mount Koya. Yomavel. Yomavel. Yomavel The voices of the lowly shrike mingling with those of the celestial bauble sounded like the jeweled tones of the mythical Kalavingar bird. Two men coming down from the top of Mount Koya, where they had visited the halls and pagodas of the Kongobuji and paid their respects at the inner shrine, stopped on a small arch bridge between the inner and outer temple precincts. "No Inosuke," said the older man pensively, "the wall is indeed fragile and impermanent, isn't it?" From his heavy homespun cloak and utilitarian hakama, he might have been taken for a country samurai, were it not for his swords, which were of outstanding quality, and the fact that his companion was far too suave and well groomed for a provincial samurai's attendant. "You saw them, didn't you?" he continued, "the graves of Oda Nobunaga, Akechi Mitsuhide, Ishida Mitsunari, Kobayakawa Kengo, all brilliant, famous generals only a few years ago. And over there, those moss-covered stones mark the burial places of great members of the Minamoto and Taira clans. Friend and foe all together here, aren't they? All of them nothing more than lonely stones. Were names like Uesugi and Takeda really great, or were we only dreaming? It gives me an odd feeling. Somehow it seems the world we live in is unreal. Is it that, or is it this place that is unreal? Who knows? Who do you suppose thought of calling this the Bridge of Illusions? It's a well-chosen name, isn't it? I think illusion is truth, just as enlightenment is reality. Is If illusion were unreal, the world couldn't exist. A samurai who devotes his life to his master cannot, not for an instant, allow himself to be nihilistic. That's why the Zen I practice is living Zen. It's the Zen of the tainted world, the Zen of hell. A samurai who trembles at the thought of impermanence or despises the world cannot perform his duty. Enough of this place. Let's go back to the other world. He walked quickly, with a remarkably firm step for a man of his age. Catching sight of priests from the Seigenji, he frowned and grumbled. Why did they have to do that? He had stayed at the temple the night before. Now about 20 young priests were lined up along the pathway, waiting to see him off, though he had said his farewells that morning with the intention of avoiding a display of this sort. He ran the gauntlet, saying polite goodbyes, and hurried on down the road overlooking the patchwork of valleys known as Kujikutani. Only when he regained the ordinary world did he relax. Conscious as he was of his own fallible human heart, the order of this world came as relief. "Hello, who are you?" The question came at him like a shot as they rounded a bend in the road. "Who are you?" asked Inosuke, the well-built, light-complexioned samurai standing in the middle of the road said politely. "Forgive me if I'm mistaken, but aren't you Lord Hosokawa Tadatoshi's senior retainer, Nagaoka Sado?" "I am Nagaoka, to be sure. Who are you and how did you know I was in the vicinity? My name is Daisuke. I'm the only son of Geiso, who lives in retirement on Mount Kudo. Seeing the name did not ring a bell, Daisuke said, "My father has long since discarded his former name. But until the Battle of Sekigahara, he was known as Sanada Saimonosuke." "Do you mean Sanada Yukimura?" "Yes, sir." With a bashfulness seemingly at odds with his appearance, Daisuke said, "A priest from the Seigenji dropped in at my father's house this morning. He said you had come to Mount Koya for a short visit. Though we heard you were traveling incognito, my father thought it would be a pity not to invite you to have a cup of tea with him." "That's very kind of him," replied Sado. He squinted for a minute, then said to Nuinosuke, "I think we ought to accept, don't you?" "Yes, sir," replied Nuinosuke without enthusiasm. Daisuke said, "It's still fairly early in the day, but my father would be honored if you would spend the night with us." Sado hesitated a moment, wondering if it was wise to accept the hospitality of a man regarded as an enemy of the Tokugawas, then nodded and said, "We can decide about that later, but I'll be delighted to join your father for a cup of tea. Don't you agree, Nuinosuke?" "Yes, sir." Nuinosuke seemed a bit on edge, but as they started down the road behind Daisuke, master and attendant exchanged knowing glances. From the village of Mount Kudo, they climbed a little farther up the mountain to a residence set apart from the other houses. The enclosure, surrounded by a low stone wall topped by a fence of woven grass, resembled the seeming fortified house of a lesser provincial warlord. But all in all, one got the impression of refinement rather than military preparedness. "My father's over there, behind that thatched building," said Daisuke as they went through the gate. There was a small vegetable garden, sufficient to provide onions and greens for the morning and evening soup. The main house stood in front of a cliff. Near the side veranda was a bamboo grove, beyond which two more houses were just visible. Nuinosuke knelt on the veranda. Outside the room Sado was shown to. Sado sat down and remarked, "It's very quiet here." A few minutes later, a young woman who appeared to be Daisuke's wife quietly served tea and left. While Sado waited for his host, he took in the view, the garden and the valley. Below was the village, and in the distance the inn town of Kamuro. Tiny flowers bloomed on the moss clinging to the overhanging thatch roof, and there was the pleasant fragrance of a rare incense. Though he could not see it, he could hear the stream running through the bamboo grove. The room itself evoked a feeling of quiet elegance, a gentle reminder that the owner of this unpretentious dwelling was the second son of Sanada Masayuki, lord of Ueda Castle and recipient of an income of 190,000 bushels. The posts and beams were thin, the ceiling low, the wall behind the small rustic alcove was of roughly finished red clay. The flower arrangement in the alcove consisted of a single sprig of pear blossoms in a slender yellow and light green ceramic vase. Sado thought of Po Chu-i's solitary pear blossom bathed by the spring rain, and of the love that united the Chinese emperor and the young Kuei-fei, as described in the Chang Heiki. He seems to hear a voiceless sob. His eyes moved to the hanging scroll above the flower arrangement. The characters, large and naive, spell out Hokoku Daimyojin, the name Hideyoshi was given when he was elevated to the rank of a god after his death. To one side, a notation in much smaller characters said that this was the work of Hideyoshi's son Hideyori at the age of 8. Feeling it discourteous to Hideyoshi's memory to have his back turned to the scroll, Sato shifted a little to the side. As he did so, he realized suddenly that the pleasant smell came not from incense burning right then, but from the walls and shoji, which must have absorbed the fragrance when incense was placed there morning and evening to purify the room in Hideyoshi's honor. Presumably, an offering of sake was also made daily, as to establish Shinto deities. Ah, he thought, Yukimura's as devoted to Hideyoshi as they say. What he could not fathom was why Yukimura did not hide the scroll. He had the reputation of being an unpredictable man, a man of the shadows, lurking and waiting for a propitious moment to return to the center of the country's affairs. It took no stretch of the imagination to conceive of guests later reporting his sentiments to the Tokugawa government. Footsteps approached along the outside corridor. The small, thin man who entered the room wore a sleeveless cloak with only a short sword in the front of his obi. There was an air of modesty about him. Dropping to his knees and bowing to the floor, Yukimura said, "Forgive me for sending my son to bring you and for interrupting your journey." This show of humility made Sato uncomfortable. From the legal viewpoint, Yukimura had given up his status. He was now only a ronin who had taken the Buddhist name Danshin Gasso. Nevertheless, he was the son of Sanada Masayuki, and his older brother Nobuyuki was a daimyo and had close connections with the Tokugawas. Being only a retainer, Sato was of much lower rank. "You shouldn't bow to me that way," he said, returning the greeting. "It's an unexpected honor and pleasure to again. Meet you again. I'm glad to see you are in good health." "You seem to be too," replied Yukimura, relaxing while Sato was still bowing. "I'm pleased to hear Lord Tadatoshi has returned to Busan safely. Thank you. This is the 3rd year since Lord Yusai passed away, so he thought it was time." "Has it been that long?" "Yes, I have been in Busan myself, though I have no idea what use Lord Tadatoshi might have for a relic like myself. I served his father and grandfather too, as you know." When the formalities were over and they began talking of this and that, Yukimura asked, "Have you seen our Zen master recently?" "No, I have seen or heard nothing of Kudo for some time." "That reminds me, it was in his meditation room that I first saw you. You were only a boy then, and you were with your father." Sato smiled happily as he reminisced about the time he had been put in charge of constructing the Shampo-in, a building the Hosokawas had donated to the Myoshinji. "A lot of hellions came to Gudo to get the rough edges smoothed off," said Yukimura. He accepted them all, not caring whether they were old or young, daimyo or ronin. "Actually, I think he particularly liked young ronin," mused Sato. "He used to say that a true ronin did not seek fame or profit, did not curry favor with the powerful, did not attempt to use political power for his own ends, did not exempt himself from moral judgments. Rather, he was as broad-minded as floating clouds, as quick to act as the rain and quite content in the midst of poverty. He never set himself any targets and never harbored any grudges. You remember that after all these years, asked Yukimura. Sado nodded ever so slightly. He also maintained that a true samurai was as hard to find as a peril in the vast blue sea. The very bones of the innumerable ronin who sacrificed their lives for the good of the country he likened to pillars supporting the nation. Sado looked straight into Yukimura's eyes as he said this, but the latter did not seem to notice the allusion to men of his own adopted status. That reminds me, he said. One of the ronin who sat at Gudo's feet in those days was a young man from Mimasaka named Musashi. Miyamoto Musashi, that's it, Musashi. He impressed me as being a man of great depth, even though he was only about 20 at the time, and his kimono was always filthy. It must be the same man. Then you do remember him? No, I didn't hear of him until recently when I was in Edo. He's a man to watch. Kudo said that his approach to Zen was promising, so I kept an eye on him. Then he suddenly disappeared. A year or two ago, I heard he had won a brilliant victory against the house of Yoshioka. I remember thinking at the time that Kudo must have a very good eye for people. I came across him quite by accident. He was in Shimosa and gave some villagers a lesson in how to protect themselves from bandits. Later, he helped them turn a tract of wasteland into paddy. I think he may be the true Ronin Kudo had in mind, the peril in the vast blue sea. Do you really think so? I recommended him to Lord Tadatoshi, but I'm afraid finding him is as hard as discovering a peril. One thing you can be sure of, if a samurai like that took an official position, it won't be for the sake of the income. He would be concerned with how his work measured up to his ideals. It may be that Musashi would prefer Mount Kudo to the house of Hosokawa. What? Sado brushed off his remark with a short laugh as if it were a slip of the tongue. You are joking, of course, said Yukimura. In my present circumstances, I can hardly afford to hire a servant, let alone a well-known ronin. I doubt whether Musashi would come even if I did invite him. There's no need to deny it, said Sado. It's no secret the Hosokawas are on the side of the Tokugawas, and everybody knows you are on the support on which Hideyori leans most heavily. Looking at the scroll in the alcove, I was impressed by your loyalty. Seemingly offended, Yukimura said, the scroll was given to me by a certain person at Osaka Castle in lieu of a memorial portrait of Hideyoshi. I tried to take good care of it, but Hideyoshi is dead. He swallowed and went on. Times change, of course. It doesn't take an expert to see that Osaka has fallen on bad days, while the power of the Tokugawas continues to grow. But I'm not able by nature to change my loyalty and serve a second lord. I wonder if people will believe it's that simple. If I may speak candidly, everybody says Hideyori and his mother furnish you great sums every year, and at a wave of the hand you could master 5 or 6,000 ronin. Yukimura laughed deprecatingly. Not a word of truth in it. I tell you, Sato, there's nothing worse than having people make you out to be more than you are. You can't blame them. You went to Hideyoshi when you were young and he liked you better than anyone else. I understand your father's been hard to say you are the Kusu, Kusunoki Masashige or the Kenming of our times. You embarrass me. Isn't it true? I want to spend the rest of my days here, quietly, in the shadow of the mountain where the Buddha's law is preserved. That's all. I'm not a man of refinement. It's enough for me if I can expand my fields a little, live to see my son's child born, have freshly made buckwheat noodles in the fall, eat fresh greens in the spring. Beyond that, I would like to live a long life far removed from wars or rumors of war. Is that really all there is to it? Sato asked mildly. Laugh if you will, but I have been spending my free time reading Lao Tzu and Chang Tzu. The conclusion I have come to is that life is enjoyment. Without enjoyment, what use is there in living? Well, well, exclaimed Sato, feigning surprise. They talked for another hour or so over cups of fresh tea served by Daisuke's wife. Eventually, Sato said, I fear I have still too long, wasting your time with my chatter. No Inosuke, shall we be going? Don't hurry off, said Yukimura. My son and his wife had made some noodles. Poor country food, but I wish you would have some with us. If you are planning to stop over at Kamura, you have plenty of time. Daisuke appeared just then to ask his father if he was ready to have the meal served. Yukimura stood up and led the way down a corridor to the back part of the house. When they were seated, Daisuke offered Sato a pair of chopsticks, saying, I'm afraid the food isn't too good, but try some anyway. His wife, not accustomed to having strangers around, diffidently held out a sake cup, which Sato politely refused. Daisuke and his wife lingered a moment longer before excusing themselves. What's that noise I can hear? Asked Sato. It sounded rather like a loom, though louder and with a slightly different quality. Oh, that? It's a wooden wheel for making cord. I'm sorry to say, I have had to put the family as servants to walk braiding cord, which we sell to help with the finances. Then he added, we are all used to it, but I suppose it might be annoying to anyone who's not. I was sent word to have it stop. No, that's all right. It doesn't bother me. I would hate to think Mm, I was holding up your walk. As he started to eat, Sato thought about the food, which sometimes provides insight into a man's condition. But he found nothing revealing there. Yukimura was not at all like the young samurai he had known years before, but he seemed to have shrouded his present circumstances in ambiguity. Sato then thought about the sounds he heard, kitchen noises, people coming and going, and a couple of times the clink of money being counted. The dispossessed daimyo were not accustomed to physical labor, and sooner or later they would run out of treasures to sell. It was conceivable that Osaka Castle had ceased to be a source of funds. Still, the idea of Yukimura in tight straits was oddly disturbing. He had been aware that his host might be trying to piece together bits of conversation to form a picture of how things were going with the house of Hosokawa, but there was no indication of this. What stood out about his recollections of their meeting was that Yukimura had not asked about his visit to Mount Koya. Sato would have answered readily, for there was nothing mysterious about it. Many years ago, Hosokawa Yusai had been sent by Hideyoshi to the Seigenji and had stayed for quite some time. He had left behind books, some writings, and some personal effects, which had become important keepsakes. Sato had gone through them, sorted them out, and arranged for the temple to turn them over to Tadatoshi. Inosuke, who hadn't moved from the veranda, cast an anxious look toward the back of the house. Relations between Edo and Osaka were strained, to say the least. Why was Sado taking a risk like this? He didn't imagine Sado to be in any immediate danger, but he had heard that the Lord of Kii province, Asano Nagaakira, had instructions to keep a strict watch on Mount Kudo. If one of Asano's men reported that Sado had paid a secret visit to Yukimura, the shogunate would become suspicious of the house of Hosokawa. Now's my chance, he thought, as the wind suddenly swept through the frost, frostier and carrier blossoms in the garden. Black clouds were forming rapidly, and it began to sprinkle. He hurried down the corridor and announced, "It's starting to rain, sir. If we are going to leave, I think now is the time." Grateful for the opportunity to break away, Sado stood up immediately. "Thank you, Inosuke," he said. "By all means, let's be on our way." Yukimura refrained from urging Sado to stay overnight. He called Daisuke and his wife and said, "Give our guests some straw rain capes, and you, Daisuke, go with them to Kamuro." At the gate, after expressing thanks for Yukimura's hospitality, Sado said, "I'm sure we will meet again one of these days. Maybe it will be another day of rain, or maybe there will be a strong wind blowing. Until then, I wish you the best of health." Yukimura grinned and nodded. "Yes, one of these days." For an instant, each man saw the other in his mind's eye, mounted on horseback and carrying a lance. But for the present, there was only the host bowing amidst falling apricot petals and the departing guests in a straw cape streaked with rain. As they walked slowly down the road, Daisuke said, "It won't rain much. At this time of year, we have a little shower like this every day." Still, the clouds above Sanjo Valley and the peaks of Koya looked threatening, and they unconsciously quickened their pace. Entering Kamuro, they were greeted by the sight of a man sharing the back of a horse with bundles of firewood and tied so tightly he couldn't move. Leading the horse was a white-robed priest, who called Daisuke's name and ran toward him. Daisuke pretended not to notice. "Someone's calling you," said Sado, exchanging glances with Inosuke. Forced to take notice of the priest, Daisuke said, "Oh, Renshobo, sorry I didn't see you." "I have come straight from Kiimi Pass," said the priest in a loud, excited voice. "The man from Edo, the one we were told to watch for. I spotted him in Nara. He put up quite a fight, but we took him alive. Now, if we take him to Gesso and force him to talk, we will find out." "What are you talking about?" broke in Daisuke. "The man on the horse, he's a spy from Edo." "Can't you shut up, you fool?" hissed Daisuke. "Do you know who the man with me is? Nagaoka Sado of the house of Hosokawa. We rarely have the privilege of seeing him, and I will not have you disturbing us with your silly jokes." Renshobo's eyes, turning to the two travelers, betrayed his shock, and he barely caught himself before blurting out, "House of Hosokawa?" Sado and Inosuke were trying to look poised and indifferent, but the wind whipped at their rain capes, making them flap out like the wings of a crane and rather spoiling their efforts. Why? Asked Renshobo in a low voice. Daisuke drew him a little to one side and spoke in a whisper. When he returned to his guest, Sado said, "Why don't you go back now? I would hate to put you to any more trouble." After watching them until they were out of sight, Daisuke said to the priest, "How could you be so stupid? Don't you know enough to open your eyes before you open your mouth? My father